Tonight We Rest by Nikita Yasmin Shah. I, like many of you, am overwhelmed, exhausted, and in pain. You see, the past year has been rather intense, as we all know, isolated during the pandemic, away from loved ones, some days in mourning over lost ones. In the midst of one of the most challenging moments of our lives, when the response to the pandemic lacked consideration for ethnic minorities, global majorities, both in the UK and the lands abroad, when the response did not take into consideration culture, race, language, and local communities, when the response allowed for more and more people of colour to remain at risk and in many cases left them to die, we saw racial disparities peek through the cracks in our society. It hurts to be reminded that the colour of your skin affords you your privilege. And then, in the midst of the pandemic, we heard about a different gasp for air, not one due to COVID, but one due to police brutality and systemic racism. We heard the words echo, "I can't breathe. I can't breathe. I can't breathe." For 8 minutes and 46 seconds, George Floyd fought for his life. You see, it took for another body, another black body, for them to pay attention. We remembered those that were unjustly murdered. Breonna Taylor shot in her own home. Ahmaud Arbery killed whilst jogging. Tamir Rice, a child, playing with a toy gun. It saddens me to say the list goes on. Global outrage ensued as people stood in solidarity, as people said their names, as people marched and chanted Black Lives Matter. We called out injustice, white supremacy, and oppression embroidered deep within the quilt of our society. Those with enough privilege were shocked to hear the lived experiences of black people, and the global majority shocked to hear that the world we live in was not in fact equal and just for all, but in fact a world entrenched so deeply in the colonial legacies of empire, so perfectly hiding racism in blind sight. There you rose to the challenge, taking the baton from generations before us who fought for the same movement dressed in different attire, tucking away the emotional burden, deep hurt, fatigue, and anxiety, out from the shadows of leaders who stayed silent, protected by their armour of privilege. There you rose to hold up the mirror to the international development and humanitarian sectors, to continue your activism and to make change a reality for many. Feelings of both determination and frustration exist in parallel, determined to make this change happen, and yet frustrated that once again our voices, once silenced over the years while sharing these exact messages, are only being picked up now. Why? A lot was said on behalf of racialized communities, yet when racialized communities spoke, whose ears did these words fall upon? Why is it so hard to just for once listen, hear, and reflect on our challenges? Sector to sector, role to role, people of colour were sidelined again. Organisers struggled to convene people. Limited resources and a lack of access to online spaces only continued to spread the divide and disparities from the physical to the digital. Cuts to the aid budget cost people their funding, their jobs, and more. Out came the calls for diversity hires that looked to us only as tokens, disregarding our merit so that organisations could be perceived as diverse. And in other instances, despite our merit, we watched privileged cisgendered white men not only gain employment but climb ranks and earn more than women of colour. It is exhausting having to continuously prove yourself over and over again, bound still by isolation, our collective communication left to mere Zoom calls. Zoom calls for work, Zoom calls for socializing, Zoom calls for organizing, Zoom calls for checking in, Zoom. The lines blur between the personal and the professional. We run our sessions, hold our events, and share our resources, and though we work remotely and hold these safe spaces for discussions from our safer spaces home, we struggle to read the room, struggle with the pushback from colleagues and leaders who value another meeting over doing the work and fail to communicate their absences, ignoring all the effort and emotional labour required for us to show up. The load gets heavier, testing the limit of women of colour, especially black women. We are asked to show up as our whole authentic selves for a crowd who still doesn't fully listen to our lived experiences, for a crowd who, despite the invite, still cannot accept our whole selves, for a crowd who does not pay us fairly for our particular skill set. Yes, working on these issues do require a particular skill set, for a crowd who tone polices our words and phrases, for a crowd privileged, so privileged to say, "I do not want to sit and be reminded of my privilege. I have done my work." The words of white feminism echoed. To simply disengage is privilege, a privilege we simply do not have. More work is to be done. But let me remind you, we are running a marathon, not a sprint. Rest is radical. Rest is resistance. Rest is resilience. Rest is a part of the marathon. We need to start prioritizing our well-being and make room to rest and recover without guilt, without shame, without hesitation. And whilst sometimes rest may feel like you aren't being active and doing enough, remember, you can't pour from an empty cup. I get it, it's hard. It seems to be a luxury that we cannot always afford. Often we let the scale slip out of balance. On one side, our well-being, on the other, the weight of what is left to be done. So what do we do when there is no one else to share the load? We carry on, and in a whisper we tell ourselves, I got this, just need to get through this, and then tonight I can rest. And then when time to rest comes, we lay our head on the pillow, ready to surrender to a sweet sleep, and instead the rush of tasks unfinished, the tragedies of the world, and the distance left to run play over and over and over in our minds, tired, disregarded, frustrated. We try to drown the noise out by watching TV, but what good is it to be there physically in person whilst our minds drift away? They say we need to unplug from the distractions and to focus inward, but where do you go when it is all there, inward, cascading in our every thought, perching on our shoulders the weight we carry? To the sisterhood, that's where you go. You are part of a wider community, so the impact you want to have need not lie on your shoulders alone. So take the pressure off yourself and only give out as much as you can. Be kind to yourself and grant yourself permission to lighten the load, to take a break and engage in activities that will help you refuel. Pick up that book and let yourself get lost in a whole new world. Exercise, go for a walk, have a little dance, just get your body moving. Cook a meal and nourish yourself. Find a way to ground, rebalance, reconnect, and if it feels right for you, focus on spirituality. And I know you might think, this sounds lovely, but where do I find the time amidst all the plates I have spinning? Well, invest in yourself, in your mind and body. Create a routine, something so strong it becomes muscle memory. A focus on well-being should not arise only in times when you are exhausted and burnt out. Let us practice rest and focus on well-being, even when we are not stressed or overwhelmed, as a way to prevent and not as a way to treat symptoms. Let us be intentional and do things we enjoy. So when we turn on the TV, let us not escape from the noise. Let us escape into a world of joy. Let the noise become laughter and pleasure. Put down that phone. Get off social media and unplug from updates. Give yourself permission to not feel anxious about the world tonight. The weight is lighter, shared by others. But isn't it ironic that when a woman of colour says she is burnt out or overwhelmed or exhausted, that this is considered a personal failure when really the system failed her, as though to say she's unable to manage her stress well enough or that she doesn't know how to relax? Isn't it ironic that resilience tools like yoga, meditation and self-care are overstretched to be the solution for the mental stress induced by systemic racism, sexism and hatred for our bodies, placing the burden of the solution on the person experiencing discrimination, when in fact an overemphasis on these tools absolves leaders from their responsibilities to fix toxic work cultures and discovering ways to bring wellness into our jobs outside of just physical activities. So again, boundaries are important. You are not responsible for making all the change happen. Think about who is responsible for what and pass the load that is not yours along. In times where you feel alone, think about who you can lean on for support. It's okay if you can't get that email out today, or if you don't get that meeting you needed. Reconsider the role of rest and well-being in your lives. They are intertwined, existing not only in the personal but also in the professional. Whilst well-being as a concept may still be new and understood as commodified acts of self-care, it truly goes beyond that. Rest requires being intentional. Both require discipline to balance out the scales, ideally tipping in the favor of peace and calm, not just surviving, but actually thriving. And it might sound like a cliche, but sometimes saying yes to yourself means saying no to others. You don't need to take on all the burden. Be courageous and take mental health days to look after yourself. Please keep choosing yourself. It is not selfish for you to want me time away from the expectation and permission of others. Please know that it is okay to fail. Just get back up. Recognize that your sense of self-worth is not tied to just one thing. To help, choose to be in spaces where you feel affirmed, heard, seen, valued, and safe. Keep speaking up, your voice matters, and when you do, remember it is fair for you to expect to be treated with dignity and respect, to not have assumptions made about your opinions. And in the workplace, it is just to expect fair pay for your experience, including lived, to receive recognition for your own work, to be given fair opportunities for professional development and advancement. You deserve to have someone check in on you and ask if you are okay, especially during troubling times. And it is okay to say, right now is not the time, I need space. Find the right relationships in your life. Be in a space where you are supported with your mental health, familial responsibilities, your dreams and ambitions. Be in a space where you have a sense of calm and are encouraged to prioritize your own well-being. It is not unfeminist to need support, even in a partnership. Often, the right one can be radical itself. Remember, to run a marathon requires training, routine, support, endurance, and momentum. To the sisterhood, rest is radical, rest is resistance, rest is resilience. Tonight, we rest.